The night my husband threw me and our 3-week-old baby out into a blizzard, he called me a parasite. My best friend stood beside him wearing the bracelet I had once admired on her wrist and told me I was ruining his life. 3 months later, I stood outside that same door as the owner of his building and his boss, watching both of their faces fall apart when they finally realized who I really was. Yeah, that happened. My name is Eleanor, and I want to tell you how I went from bleeding through my C-section stitches in a subway station with $17 in my pocket to running a billion-dollar empire, rebuilding the shelter that saved my life, and holding the future of the man who discarded me in my hands. And while you're listening, I want you to keep asking yourself something. If it were you, what would you have done? That night started like any other bad night. The kind where something feels off in the air, but you can't name it yet. Snow was coming down in thick, angry sheets outside our floor-to-ceiling windows, wind slamming against the glass so hard it rattled. The city lights were blurry behind the frost, like I was already looking at my life through someone else's eyes. I was standing barefoot on the cold marble, in an oversized t-shirt and maternity leggings, holding my 3-week-old daughter Rosemary against my chest. My body still felt like an open wound. Every step pulled at the fresh stitches from the emergency C-section that had nearly killed both of us. My hair was tied up in one of those messy knots you don't do for style. You do because you're too tired to function. I smelled like milk sweat and hospital disinfectant that never quite left my skin. And then there was Blake. He stood in the middle of that perfect living room. Leather sofa, huge TV art we couldn't really afford, but bought for the image, with his arms crossed wearing one of his tailored shirts, jaw clenched in that way I used to think was focused and determined. That night, it just looked cruel. "I want you out tonight," he said. Like he was telling me we were out of cereal, like it was just another decision on his to-do list. At first, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. What I laughed this small, shaky sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. "Blake, it's a blizzard outside. I just had surgery. Rosemary is 3 weeks old. What are you talking about?" He didn't flinch. "I'm done, Eleanor," he said, eyes like ice. "I can't do this anymore. The whining, the neediness, the constant drama. You have 20 minutes to pack whatever you can carry. The rest stays." And that's when I heard the heel click on the marble. Jessica. She was stretched out on the sofa when I turned. Red dress legs, crossed diamond bracelet flashing under the recessed lights like this was some kind of premiere she'd been invited to. Jessica, my freshman year roommate, my maid of honor. The girl who once snuck me cheap wine in a coffee tumbler after my mother's funeral, now standing there, like she owned the place. She walked over, slid her manicured hand onto his arm, and gave me that faux sympathetic look. "Stop being so dramatic, Elle," she said. "Blake and I have been in love for over a year. We tried to spare your feelings, waited until after the baby came. But we can't keep living a lie. He deserves happiness. I do too. You're suffocating him." A year. In that moment, my brain started pulling up receipts, like it had been keeping a secret file the whole time. The long work dinners that went later and later, the last minute, canceled brunches with her, the night of the Richardson Technologies Gala, when I was stuck at home vomiting and begged her to keep an eye on Blake for me. I'd literally handed my husband to my best friend on a silver platter. Blake took a breath, like he was gearing up for some big speech. "When we met, you were different," he said. "Sweet, uncomplicated. Then you turned into this burden. I work 60 hours a week trying to climb the ladder, and all I get from you is complaints about being tired, needing help, wanting me around more. I need a partner, not a parasite." That word hit me harder than any punch could have. Parasite. Let me ask you something right here. If your partner looked you in the eye 3 weeks after you risked your life carrying his child and called you a parasite, what would you have done? Screamed, Thrown, something collapsed. Gone numb. Be honest with yourself. I wish I could tell you I exploded, that I stood my ground, that I walked out on my own terms. The truth is, when someone has been slowly chipping away at your sense of reality for years, when every time you cry, they tell you you're too sensitive, when every time you bring up a concern, they say you're overreacting, by the time they finally set your life on fire, you don't even trust your own instinct to run. My hands started moving before my brain did. I went into the bedroom every step, tearing fire through my abdomen. Grabbed the diaper bag, stuffed in diapers. Formula, a couple of onesies, an extra blanket. For myself, I took a pair of jeans that didn't fit anymore, and a sweater. That was it. 6 years of marriage condensed into one overstuffed bag. When I came back out, Jessica was already looking at her phone, bored like my whole breakdown was just background noise. Blake checked his watch. "Security will escort you downstairs if you're not gone in 5 minutes, he said. "Your phone is in my name. The plan is canceled and I've already changed all the passwords. You came into this marriage with nothing. You're leaving with nothing. Actions have consequences, Eleanor." He said it so calmly, like he was teaching a business ethics class. The security guard wouldn't meet my eyes in the hallway. The elevator doors slid shut in slow motion. And in my head, I could still hear Jessica's voice, that sing-song cruelty. "You always make everything about you." In the lobby, the doorman stepped out from behind his podium. "Mrs. Richardson, is everything all right?" he asked, eyes flicking to my tear-stained face, the sleeping baby against my chest, the single bag digging into my shoulder. I opened my mouth, but if I had spoken in that moment, it would have been nothing but a scream. And I knew once I started, I might never stop. So I just shook my head and pushed out into the storm. The cold hit like a slap. Snow slashed at my face sideways, wind cutting straight through my thin coat. I pulled Rosemary tighter against me and just started walking, because the only thing worse than moving was standing still and feeling it all. Here's the crazy part. 3 days earlier, I'd been sitting in a dark wood office on 5th Avenue, with a lawyer telling me I was rich beyond anything I'd ever imagined. "Your grandfather, Richard Thornton, left you his entire estate," he'd said, sliding documents across a mahogany desk like it was no big deal. Real estate holdings in 12 states, a highly diversified investment portfolio, controlling interest in several major corporations. Current valuation, approximately $1.3 billion. I remember staring at the number like it was written in another language. My grandfather. The man who stood at the back of my mother's funeral pressed a business card into my hand and said, "You have your grandmother's spirit," then disappeared again. The man my mother refused to talk about, the one she told me, had chosen money and control over family. Now he'd left me everything. Then came the catch. "There is one condition," the lawyer Martin Piton said, steepling his fingers under his chin. "For 30 days you cannot tell anyone about this inheritance, and you cannot access the funds. The assets will remain in trust while you maintain your life as it currently is." He wanted to see who truly valued you for you. After 30 days, if confidentiality is maintained, the trust dissolves and everything passes to your full control. I remember laughing and saying something like, "That sounds like a plot from one of those old movies," but I signed anyway. At the time, the idea of staying quiet for 30 days didn't seem that hard. I had no idea that 3 days later staying quiet would mean walking into a shelter instead of a hotel. Back to the snow. I wandered for blocks until my legs felt like they were going to give out, then ducked into the first place I knew would be open and warm, the subway. The lights down there are a kind of cruel you can't describe until you've seen them at 2 in the morning. Flickering, sickly green, making everyone look a little more tired than they already are. I sat on a plastic bench by a humming vending machine, lowered myself inch by inch so I didn't rip anything open, and unwrapped Rosemary just enough to see her face. Her skin was still warm and pink, her tiny mouth making little sucking motions in her sleep. I checked my wallet. $17 in crumpled bills. My phone was a dead brick in my pocket, and even if it wasn't, Blake had shut the plan off. I had no contact with my grandfather's people because of the test. I had no family left in the city. My friends were dinner party friends, couple friends, and one of them was currently sitting on my couch upstairs with my husband. If you've never been truly cornered, I hope you never are. Your world shrinks down to very basic math. Bottles of formula left, hours until morning, dollars in your pocket. How long you can keep your eyes open before your body shuts down. It stops being about what's my 5-year plan and becomes how do I keep this baby alive through the night. Rosemary woke up and started that panicked newborn cry, the one that slices straight through your chest. I fed her one of the bottles I'd grabbed, my hands shaking so hard the plastic rattled against my wedding ring. I had 4 bottles, total no way to warm water or sterilize anything once those ran out. The $17 would buy more powder, but not a safe place to mix it. A few people glanced our way, and then away, doing that slight head turn humans do when they don't want to see something that might make them feel obligated to act. You know what I mean, right? That tiny avoidance that says, if I don't really look, I can pretend I didn't know. At one point, a police officer walked by, glanced at me, glanced at the baby, and just kept walking. I thought about calling out to him, telling him everything, but I could already see it. The confused look, the radio call child services showing up some stranger walking away, holding my daughter, while I tried to explain a billionaire inheritance and a dead grandfather and a 30-day test. So I stayed put until the first light of morning started to show at the top of the station stairs, jerking awake every time footsteps came too close, my back screaming, my incision throbbing. When the trains got crowded with commuters, I finally gave in and asked a woman where the nearest women's shelter was. She gave me directions, then paused, really looking at me for the first time, and said quietly, "Get there early. They fill up fast." The shelter was in a neighborhood I'd never had a reason to visit before. The building was an old warehouse, brick walls, tagged with layers of graffiti bars over the windows, a paper sign on the door that said, "No vacancy with emergency intake. 7 to 9 a.m., scribbled underneath in red marker. I got in line at 6:45. There were women in worn coats, kids in too thin jackets, a girl who couldn't have been more than 19 holding a toddler on her hip. We all had that same look, dazed, exhausted, pretending not to notice each other's pain. The woman in front of me turned around, took in the diaper bag. The baby, the coat that still looked expensive even in that line. First time she said in a raspy voice like cigarettes, and too many late nights had scraped it raw. I nodded. "You got that shocked look," she said. "Give it a week, it fades." She glanced down at Rosemary. "How old?" she asked. 3 weeks, I said. She whistled softly. "Jesus. Let me guess, some guy decided you were too much work." I told her the short version, the snow, the eviction, my best friend. The subway. I didn't mention the lawyer or the trust. She listened all the way through without interrupting, and when I finished, she shook her head. "He got a name?" she asked. "Blake Richardson," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Her eyes narrowed. "Richardson Technologies?" she asked. I used to do data entry there before they automated our department and kicked us out with no severance. Men like your husband love talking about innovation, while they treat people like broken parts. Inside, a woman named Diana sat behind a folding table with a stack of forms and a computer that looked like it hated its job. Her name tag said Intake Coordinator. Her eyes said, "I've seen too much." "Name," she said, fingers already hovering over the keyboard. "Eleanor Richardson," I said then. Added softly, at least for now. She took in the details. My still healing body, The baby, the ring on my finger, the quality of my clothes. "Tell me what happened," she said, and something in her voice made it sound less like a script and more like a real question. I told the story again with more detail this time. The emergency C-section, the affair reveal being told. I had 20 minutes to leave the canceled phone, the $17, the subway bench. By the time I finished, my throat was sore, and Rosemary was fussing again. Diana sighed. "We're at about 110% capacity," she said. "Women sleeping on mattresses in the common room, staff stretched thin. But you've got a newborn, and that puts you at the front of the line. I can put you in a family room for 2 weeks. After that, you need a plan. We're a bridge, not a destination. Do you understand?" I did, and I didn't. I understood I had 2 weeks before I was back on the street. I did not understand how someone whose husband was announcing expansions on the business network could be standing there being told she was lucky to get a bed. Room 217 had 4 single beds, shoved into a space built for 2. One bed had kids' toys and picture books neatly stacked on it. One had clothes folded with military precision. One was a mess of garbage bags and random items like a tornado had decided to live there. The last bed by the drafty window overlooking a brick wall was mine. That's where I met the women who would quietly change me more than any billionaire ever could. Maria had the neat bed. She used to be a paralegal before her firm downsized and her job disappeared. She'd burned through savings trying to stay afloat. Then her car got repossessed. Then she ended up there with her 7-year-old son, Diego. Every day she went to the library to use the public computers and sent out resumes. Kesha had the garbage bag bed. 3 kids under 5 eyes that looked 10 years older than her face and a nervous way of watching the door, like she expected someone to burst in at any second. Her ex-husband was in jail for beating her. But fear doesn't always care about where a body is. The toys bed belonged to Brianna, 19 years old, with a 2-year-old daughter, Jasmine. She'd aged out of foster care, gotten pregnant, tried to juggle 2 minimum wage jobs and parenting until a bad flu took her out, and both jobs let her go. No savings, no family, no safety net. We were 4 women at completely different points in our lives. But at 2 a.m., when all the kids finally slept, and the fluorescent lights hummed, and someone cried quietly into their pillow, we were all the same. People who had slipped through the cracks of a system that loves to say work hard, and you'll be fine, while pulling the ladder up behind it. Days in that shelter were a loop. Wake up at 6 to avoid the bathroom rush breakfast by 7. Mandatory workshops on job skills or budgeting meetings with case managers. Lunch, killing time in a common room with peeling paint and a TV bolted to the wall. Dinner at 5 kids melting down before lights out at 10. 2 weeks maximum stay unless special circumstances applied. From the outside, it might sound structured, maybe even helpful. From the inside, it felt like trying to run a race with your shoelaces tied together. The second or third night around 1 a.m., when I was walking the hallway, bouncing a screaming Rosemary, who had decided colic was her new personality. I ran into Gloria, one of the night staff. She was in her late 50s, gray streaks in her hair, soft smile that somehow wasn't pitying. "You're gonna wear a groove in this floor," she said. "She won't stop," I said, half laughing, half crying. "I'm pretty sure everyone in this building hates me already." "They don't," she said. "They've all had their version of this. Trust me, you're just new and new hurts more." We walked up and down the hallway, while I rocked Rosemary and Gloria told me pieces of her life, how she'd been in a shelter herself as a young woman, how she'd worked her way out, how she came back because someone needed to be the one who didn't look away. "You're different. she said, finally, studying my face. There's a steel in you under all that shock. I don't know what's waiting for you out there, but I have a feeling you're not staying here. I almost told her then about the trust, about the dead grandfather, about the documents sitting in some law office, but the words stuck. It felt wrong, like cosplaying poverty. I was homeless, but I wasn't like Maria or Keisha or Brianna. I had an invisible parachute waiting even if I couldn't pull the cord yet. That guilt sat heavy in my chest. One afternoon, maybe 4 days in, we were in the cafeteria eating something that might have been meatloaf. It tasted like cardboard flavored with despair. Kids ran around between the tables. Someone's baby cried. A volunteer tried to scrape trays into trash bags without throwing up. On the wall, the TV played the news on low volume. I was zoning out until I heard a familiar name. Richardson Technologies announced today a major expansion of their downtown headquarters. I looked up and there he was, Blake in a perfectly fitted suit, standing behind a podium, with the company logo smiling for reporters, like he hadn't just tossed his wife and child into the snow. Cameras flashed. He talked about creating hundreds of new jobs and investing in the future. And right behind him, with her hand on his shoulder, was Jessica. New diamond necklace dress that looked custom hair and makeup camera ready. She was beaming like she'd won. "That's her, huh?" Keisha said, dropping down into the chair next to me, following my gaze. "The friend." "Yeah," I said, my voice suddenly tight. "She looks exactly like I pictured," Keisha muttered. "One of those women who thinks the world is a buffet and other people's lives are the side dishes." We watched in silence as the news showed glossy renderings of Blake's expansion project city. Officials shaking his hand, commentators talking about what a visionary he was. I sat there in a faded shelter t-shirt holding my baby and felt this sharp acid anger rise in my throat. Not just at him, but at the fact that the world would look at that segment and think, what a success, never knowing the bodies he'd stepped over to get there. That night, after everyone else had fallen asleep, I lay on my narrow bed and stared at the water stains on the ceiling and started making a different kind of plan. Not something grand, Hot. I'm going to destroy him, or I'm going to become a saint. Just this quiet promise. If I get through these 30 days, if I walk back into that lawyer's office and sign those papers, I am never going to be this powerless again, and I'm not going to forget the women who were powerless with me. Days passed. Maria landed an interview at a smaller law office and came back shaking with nerves, asking me if her blazer still looked professional enough. Brianna studied for her GED in the corner of the common room, while Jasmine tried to climb into her lap. Every 30 seconds. Keisha spent hours on the phone with housing offices, who kept saying we're full or 2-year wait list. One woman hit her 2-week limit and was told she had to leave. She'd just gotten a job interview for the following Monday and begged for an extension. The staff member, a heavy-set guy named Rob, shook his head and recited the rules. She walked out of that building with everything she owned in 2 black trash bags, while her little boy asked why they had to go. Do you think that's fair? That someone's entire future can hinge on whether a shelter has enough beds on a particular day while on the other side of town? My ex is popping champagne over an expansion that might never benefit the people he helped push into the cracks. By the time the 30th day rolled around, I was bone-deep exhausted. My 2 weeks at the shelter had technically expired, but Diana had quietly marked special circumstances on my file and bought me extra time, probably because of Rosemary. I knew that grace couldn't last forever. I took 3 buses to get back to 5th Avenue, clutching Rosemary and a folder with every scrap of paper the shelter had given me. Walking into that wood-paneled office again felt surreal, like I was tracking mud across a museum floor. Patan stood when he saw me. "Ms. Morrison," he said. And this time he didn't add, "Richardson." You look different. I am, I said. Let's just say your client picked one hell of a test. He nodded slowly, then got down to business. You maintained confidentiality? He asked. No one was told about the inheritance. No one, I said. In that case, he said, sliding a stack of documents to me. As of today, the trust dissolves, and all assets transfer to your control. Due to market fluctuations, your net worth is currently approximately $1.3 billion. The number didn't hit me the way you'd expect. When you've spent a month counting diapers and bus fare billion, doesn't feel like a real unit of measurement. What hit me was something else he said. Your grandfather was thorough, Piton continued. He had a tendency to gather information. He had my firm investigate your husband when you became serious again, when you got engaged, and periodically over the years. The reports on Mr. Richardson were not flattering. He opened another folder, thicker worn at the edges. Blake is described as extremely status-driven, he said. Sees relationships as transactional, inclined to discard them when they no longer serve his goals. Your grandfather believed you might repeat your mother's pattern, marrying a man who saw you as an accessory, and he wanted to give you a way out. I felt my stomach twist. He knew this would happen. I said slowly. He knew Blake would throw me out once he thought I had nothing. He anticipated a version of it. Piton said carefully. His will, written 2 years ago, includes notes predicting that if your financial position appeared weak and your usefulness to Blake diminished, your husband would end the marriage without concern for your well-being. That is why the 30-day confidentiality clause exists. He believed you would only fully accept the truth about Blake if it played out in front of you with no ability to buy your way out. It was like someone had taken a mirror and forced me to look at a version of my life where I'd told Blake about the inheritance on day one. I saw it so clearly. Me rushing home, blurting it out. Blake suddenly supportive, Jessica backing away with a fake apology, the three of us pretending it had all been a misunderstanding, while he maneuvered himself closer and closer to the money. I could see myself writing checks to save his company, signing over things I didn't fully understand, waking up one day with my name on paperwork I never really read. I was angry at my grandfather for orchestrating my suffering. But somewhere under that was a grudging understanding. If he'd just handed me the keys, I probably would have invited my abusers inside. That's not all, Piton said, pulling out a different chart. You should know what exactly you own. He laid down a sheet showing corporate structures, names of companies, arrows everywhere. Thornton Holdings has controlling interest in 43 companies, he said. One of them is Richardson Technologies. For a second, the words didn't compute. I'm sorry what I said. You own a controlling share of Richardson Technologies, he repeated calmly. Additionally, the building where your husband's penthouse is located is owned by a Thornton subsidiary. His apartment is technically a corporate lease, a perk, tied to his position at the company. He let that sink in. The man who threw you out of his home, he said gently, has spent the last 6 years working for a company you now control, living in a building you now own. There was the twist. While I'd been lying awake on a shelter mattress, convinced I had nothing, I had technically owned the roof over my ex-husband's head and the paycheck he bragged about. While I'd been warming bottles in a communal microwave, his whole career had already been sitting quietly in my portfolio. You know that feeling when the floor beneath you shifts and you realize the house you thought you were in is actually a stage set. That's how it felt. Ow. What do you want to do? Piton asked after a moment. We can remove him from his position. File charges related to the funds he transferred from your joint accounts. There would be significant public scrutiny. Or we can ignore all of this and focus on other things. The choice is yours entirely. I thought of Blake smirking behind that podium. Jessica's hand on his shoulder. I thought of Maria anxiously waiting for a call back from her interview of Keisha, bouncing a screaming toddler on her knee, while being told there was nothing available of Brianna, trying to memorize math formulas, while Jasmine tugged at her sleeve. And for the first time since my life blew up, I felt something like clarity. I want to buy the shelter I stayed in, I said. The building, the program, all of it. I want to renovate it, expand it, pay the staff like professionals, and turn it into an actual launch pad instead of a revolving door. Then I want to build more, in other neighborhoods, other cities. A network of places that catch women before they hit the absolute bottom. Patan nodded, making notes. And Blake, he asked. I took a breath. Blake keeps his job, I said. At least for now. He keeps his apartment. He keeps the illusion that he won. I don't want him unemployed and able to play the victim. I want him to wake up every day, go to a job he thinks he earned, and know somewhere in the back of his mind that the woman he called a parasite could take it all away with one vote. Slow burn, Patan said, and almost smiled. Your grandfather would approve. He always believed the worst punishment was making someone live with the consequences of their choices. Also, I added, I want a divorce. Ironclad. Full custody of Rosemary. Restitution for the money he stole from our accounts. And I want to control how that story is told. Consider it done. He said, right here, let me ask you, if you had that level of power handed to you after what I've just described, what would you do with it? Would you crush him completely, quietly, cut him off and walk away, or try to turn your pain into something bigger than revenge? Fast forward 3 months. The shelter was a construction zone in the best way. Scaffolding outside, fresh paint, going up inside, new beds arriving. We were adding a daycare room, private counseling offices, a computer lab. Staff were getting raises and benefits for the first time. I'd set up a foundation with a boring legal name and a bold mission statement. Long-term support for women and children in crisis. Not Band-Aids. Bridges. Maria got the job at that law office. Her starting salary wasn't what she used to make, but it was enough for a small apartment with a real kitchen. The foundation just happened to have a program that helped with first month's rent and deposit. Officially, she had no idea it was me. Unofficially, when she sent a picture of Diego grinning in his new room with superhero posters on the wall, I sat on my hotel bed and cried. Brianna got into a GED program that included childcare, paid for by anonymous donors. Keisha found a housing unit that accepted her and all 3 kids. The foundation quietly picked up the slack the subsidy didn't cover. And Blake. Richardson Technologies was celebrating the success of their expansion. Blake had been promoted to senior vice president with his face in business magazines and his name on panels like leaders of the future. He and Jessica were living full-time in the penthouse now, hosting parties with catered sushi and perfectly chilled champagne. That's when I knew it was time to knock on that door again. I didn't go alone, not physically. My bodyguard waited by the elevator, but emotionally, I took everyone with me. Gloria's midnight pep talks. Diana's blunt compassion. Maria's shaking hands. Before her interview, Hisha's kids chasing each other through the common room. Brianna falling asleep over her GED prep book. I knocked. Jessica opened the door, her perfectly curled sweater that probably cost more than an entire month of shelter groceries. For a second, she just frowned like her brain was buffering. Then I watched it click. Her eyes widened. Her hand flew to her mouth. Eleanor. She whispered. What are you doing here? Hi, Jess, I said. Is Blake home? He came up behind her, still in that polished package. Fitted shirt, expensive watch, the whole successful man costume. His face went white when he saw me. You can't be here, he snapped. This is harassment. I'll call security. Please do, I said calmly. Tell them the building owner would like a word. He blinked. What are you talking about? He said. But there was a tremor in his voice now. I held up the folder. Blake, let me make this simple, I said. 4 months ago, my grandfather died. He left me his entire estate, including Thornton Holdings. Thornton Holdings owns the building you're standing in and a controlling share in Richardson Technologies. So when you threw me out of your apartment, you were standing in my property. When you walk into your office, you walk into a company I control. You work for me. He laughed this short, hysterical sound. You're lying, he said. You had nothing. I checked your background. Your mother cut ties with her family. You didn't have any money. You checked my mother's side, I said. You never thought to check my grandfather. Richard Thornton. Google him. Jessica's grip tightened on his arm. That's not possible, she said, shaking her head. If you had all that, you would have told us. You wouldn't have ended up in a shelter. She trailed off, realizing what she'd just admitted. That's the thing I said. My grandfather made me keep it secret for 30 days. 30 days where I found out exactly who you two really are, when you think I have nothing to offer you. I stepped past them just enough to set one thing down on the console table by the door. A photo. Me in that shelter bed. Hair a mess, face pale, holding a tiny swaddled rosemary against my chest. Taken by a nurse the morning after we arrived for the file. This is who I was the night you celebrated your freedom, I said softly. This is what you did. That's your daughter in that picture, by the way. Jessica stared at it. Then at me, tears starting to spill. I'm so sorry, Elle, she said. We were stupid, No, I said. You were very strategic. You think I don't know the affairs started long before you told me. I've seen the reports. I know about the money transferred from our joint account to yours, Blake. I know about the timeline you two planned to kick me out after the baby so it wouldn't look bad in court. Let's not pretend this was some sudden bout of stupidity. He swallowed hard. What do you want? He asked. I handed him the divorce papers. You're going to sign these, I said. Today, I get full custody of Rosemary. You get supervised visitation if you decide to be a father. You will wire back every dollar you siphoned from our accounts plus interest. In return, I will not press criminal charges. I will not leak the details of your affair to the press, and I will not have you escorted out of this building today. And if I don't sign, he said through his teeth, then tomorrow morning, I said a few reporters I've gotten friendly with are going to receive a thick envelope containing that photo, your text messages to Jessica, bank records, and security footage of the night you had your wife and newborn escorted out into a snowstorm. They will also receive a statement from Eleanor Morrison, Thornton, new head of Thornton Holdings, detailing her escape from an emotionally abusive marriage. Do you really want to see how fast your company distances itself from you when that hits? Silence. Jessica started to speak, then stopped. Blake looked at the papers and really looked, and I saw something crack behind his eyes. Not remorse exactly, but the realization that he had miscalculated the value of the person standing in front of him. I'm not here to bargain, I added. You don't get to negotiate after you've shown me exactly how little my safety mattered to you. This is the most merciful version of this conversation you're going to get. He signed. I didn't stay to watch him read every clause. I knew my legal team had made the agreement airtight. I knew he'd try to find loopholes later, and I knew he'd fail. On my way out, I paused at the threshold. I'm not going to fire you, I said. Turning back to him. Not yet. You're going to keep working at Richardson. You're going to keep bringing home that paycheck. You're going to keep living in this apartment until your lease ends. But every time you walk into a boardroom, every time you flash that badge, you're going to know that if I decide tomorrow that you've learned nothing, it all disappears. You wanted power so badly, you were willing to throw your family into the snow to get it. Congratulations. You finally met someone who has more of it than you. Jessica covered her face with her hands. Blake just stood there, shoulders sagging, as if someone had cut all the strings he'd been using to hold his puppet show together. I left them with the photo. In the elevator, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Diana at the shelter. Saw the news about the anonymous funding and the renovation plans she wrote. I had a feeling you were more than you said. Thank you for not forgetting us. I stared at that message for a long moment and typed back. You saved my life. This is just the beginning, because that's the truth. As satisfying as that scene at the penthouse was, as much as you might want it to be. The big finale. It was really just one part of a much bigger story. The real work was, and still is, everything that came after. I used my grandfather's money to bankroll things he probably never thought about. Trauma therapy for women who've spent years being told they're worthless legal aid, for moms fighting to keep their kids' job training programs designed around the reality of childcare, not the fantasy of just work harder. I fund pilot programs for guaranteed housing for women, leaving abusive situations. So nowhere to go is never the thing that sends them back. People ask me all the time if I forgive Blake, if I forgive Jessica, if I forgive my grandfather for putting me through that month. The honest answer is complicated. I don't forgive what Blake did. I understand it now. He's a small man who chased a big image and treated people like rungs on a ladder. People like that rarely grow without some kind of massive internal shift. And I don't see that happening with him. I don't spend my days thinking about him. His punishment is living in the shadow of who I became without him. Jessica. Some days I feel nothing. Some days I feel a weird, distant pity. She traded a friend who would have shared everything with her for proximity to a man who will always love himself more. That's not a bargain I envy. My grandfather, I struggle with. He played God with my life in a way that still makes me clench my jaw. But he also gave me the tools to make sure my daughter never has to choose between safety and survival. He forced me to see up close what poverty looks like in a country that loves to pretend everyone has the same shot. For that, I am begrudgingly grateful. Here's where I leave it with you. Do you think what I did was right? Was I too harsh? Not harsh. Enough, just fair if you'd been in my place. Secret heiress thrown out with a newborn, watching your ex and your ex-best friend thrive, while you slept on a shelter mattress. What would you have done with that power when it finally dropped into your hands? Do you believe people like Blake deserve a second chance? Or do you think there has to be a line where you say, no more? This is the consequence. How much responsibility do we put on individuals who make cruel choices? And how much do we put on the systems that make those choices so easy for them? I really want to hear what you think. Tell me in the comments what part of this story hit you the hardest, what you would have done differently, whether you think I focus too much on helping others and not enough on punishing the people who hurt me, or the other way around. If you've ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you, used, you threw you away and you came back stronger, I'd love to hear that too. If my story made you feel anything, angry, hopeful, frustrated, seen, share this video with someone who might need to be reminded that rock bottom is not the end of the story. It's just one brutal chapter. And if you want more real stories like this, where we talk honestly about money, power, love, and the way they're all tangled together, hit like subscribe and stick around. Because sometimes the moment someone decides you're worthless is exactly the moment your real life begins.